Before we begin, drop a quick hi in the comments. It may seem like a small thing, but it really helps this story reach more sci-fi fans like us. I always like seeing who's watching. The shuttle looked wrong. Not just old. Not just damaged. That wrong that IT sat in the center of docking bay 17 like a wound that had somehow landed among polished metal and perfect light. Around it, everything else looked expensive, clean, and advanced. Sleek alien ships rested in silence across the huge bay. Some were grown from living tissue. Some glowed with soft energy. Some looked like works of art more than machines. And then there was the human shuttle. Its hull was burned black in places. Rough weld lines crossed the body where broken metal had been patched by hand. One engine was clearly not original. It was the wrong shape, the wrong color, and mounted slightly off-center like it had been stolen from another wreck and forced at FIT. IT did not belong here. All around the observation galleries above the bay, delegates had gathered to watch. 300 representatives. 47 species. They had come for a show. Docking Bay 17 had welcomed ships from over 900 worlds. Royal vessels. Vabagas. Diplomatic cruisers. Living craft grown in sacred nurseries. Pleasure ships carved from crystal and memory. Nothing like this had ever landed there. It actually came, one Drenith noble said, his bright feathers flashing with amusement. The Death World sent a ship, another replied. And it looks like trash. Laughter spread through the gallery. Some species laughed in musical tones. Others clicked their mandibles. Others croaked or hissed or flashed colors across their skin. But the meaning was the same. They were mocking the humans before they had even stepped outside. Then the shuttle ramp lowered. IT did not slide, opened smoothly. IT came down with a harsh grinding scream of old metal, like the ship itself was in pain. And out walked the human, Jack Harland. The first thing that surprised them was how ordinary he looked. Their probes had studied humanity from a safe distance for years. They had learned that humans came from a Class 9 death world, a planet with violent weather, crushing predators, disease, hunger, heat, cold, poison, deep oceans, high gravity, and constant environmental danger. A world where survival itself was a daily fight. The Concordance had expected something else. Something huge. Something armored. Something that looked dangerous from the first glance. Jack Harland looked like a mechanic who had gotten lost on his way to a repair job. He was a little over 2 meters tall, broad-shouldered, solid, but not monstrous. He wore a faded flight suit with patches sewn into the knees and shoulders. Heavy work boots. A tool belt. No armor. No decorations. No rank markings anyone recognized it. And no claws. And no fangs. And no visible weapons. Just a man walking down the ramp like he had somewhere to be. That, a Drenith delegate said, loudly enough for half the gallery to hear. That is the monster from the quarantine world. Jack stopped at the bottom of the ramp and looked up. 300 alien faces stared back at him from the galleries, some openly laughing, some recording, some just curious. He scratched his jaw once like a man waiting for a late cargo crew. Then he started walking, and OBOW, no hesitation, no sign that he cared what any of them thought. That bothered them more than they expected. He moved like someone crossing a workyard. Calm, focused, unimpressed. Before he reached the main doors, a security team stepped in front of him. 4 Kethran enforcers, tall, insect-like, armored in natural black plates that covered their bodies like living shields. Their eyes were wide and faceted. Their jaws clicked in warning. Blades rested folded inside their forearms. Remain still for a weapon scan, the lead enforcer ordered. Jack stopped. He did not raise his hands. He did not spread his arms. He just stood there while scanning beams moved over his body. The machine chimed. The Kethran checked the results. Metal objects detected. Belt mounted. Tools, Jack said flatly. Pry bar. Knife. Multi-tool. Nothing fancy. The scan results were projected up to the gallery for everyone to see. That a wave of ridicule followed. Primitive. That was the word passed around. Primitive. And energy weapons. And shield field. And implants. And tactical system. And armor weave. And drones. And visible tech beyond simple hand tools made of metal and work-grade material. This was the human representative. This was what a death world had chosen to send. Cleared, the Kethrin finally said. Proceed to the Grand Chamber. Do not leave the marked route. Jack walked past them without answering. The Grand Chamber had been built to make visitors feel small, and it succeeded. The ceiling rose so high it almost disappeared from view. The walls were carved from crystal-like material that seemed to hold light inside it. Tier after tier of seating climbed around the chamber in perfect circles. Each level belonged to a different species, arranged by power, status, and political importance. The highest places were reserved for the oldest and strongest members of the Concordance. Lower tiers meant lower worth. Every line of the chamber was a message. This is power. This is order. This is who rules the galaxy. The center was the speaking floor, an open space where delegates addressed the assembly. Jack walked into that center alone. 1200 eyes turned toward him. 1200 delegates, every important species in known space, every power that had shaped galactic civilization for 10,000 years. An announcer's voice rang through the chamber. The single representative of Sol 3 arrives. Classification: Class 9 Death World. Quarantine status: permanent. Invitation status: observer only. No speaking rights. No voting rights. No formal recognition. The words were calm, ceremonial, polite, and completely humiliating. They had not invited humanity as equals. They had invited them as a joke, a living insult, the way to laugh at a dangerous little species from a filthy world that was never expected to matter. Jack stood in the center of the floor and listened. He did not react. He did not look around nervously. He did not show anger. He stood balanced and still, hands relaxed at his sides. Above him, the comments began. He looks lost. He smells strange. The atmospheric sensors are reading hydrocarbons and sodium chloride. Is that a cooling process? Sweat. Another voice answered after checking a translation file. The human body releases fluid to regulate temperature. A pause, then disgust. Barbaric. Jack kept waiting. Then the room changed. The lower tiers parted, and a figure moved down toward the speaking floor with slow, ancient grace. Every species in the chamber recognized him. Sethervone, 3,000 years old. Poison master of the Veari Dominion. His body was long and elegant, covered in dark scales that shifted from deep violet to black at the edges. His eyes were gold. His movements were smooth, beautiful, and cold in a way that made weaker species step back without thinking. In his hands, he carried the chalice of welcome. The vessel was ancient, older than many civilizations in the room. Made from crystal and bone fused by techniques no one still understood. Inside it, liquid changed color as it moved, gold, green, amber, then shades with no human name. Every delegate knew what it was. Every delegate knew what came next. This was the first lesson every new species learned. The Concordance called it tradition, hospitality, ceremony, but everyone knew the truth. The first drink was poison. Not enough to kill, usually, just enough to bring pain, disorientation, weakness, sometimes paralysis, a reminder that the Concordance could break you whenever it wanted, a reminder of your place. Sethervone stopped a few steps away from Jack and raised the chalice. Welcome, creature of Soul 3, he said, voice smooth as silk over a blade. The Concordance offers you its hospitality. Drink and be received. The chamber went still. This was the part they had all been waiting for. The Deathworlder would drink, the poison would hit, the human would collapse, and the chamber would laugh. Jack looked at the chalice, then at Sethervone. What's in it? The room shifted. That was not part of the ritual. Sethervone answered without losing his calm. A ceremonial blend. Traditional compounds symbolizing the embrace of the Concordance. Jack sniffed it once, then looked back up. Smells like poison. Silence. Real silence this time. Not amused silence. Not curious silence. Sharp silence. The kind that comes when a joke suddenly stops being funny. Sethervone's scales changed shade for a second, a tiny reaction, but every old species in the room noticed it. All new delegates drink, Sethervone said. It is tradition. Jack reached out and took the chalice. For one moment, he held it in his hands and looked down at the swirling liquid. The chamber waited. Everyone thought he would hesitate now, take a careful sip, maybe refuse, maybe try to bargain. Instead, Jack lifted the chalice and drank all of it. Not a taste, not a sip. He emptied the whole thing in 4 long swallows, then lowered the cup. 1,200 delegates held their breath. They waited for the poison to do what it always did. The shaking, the choking, the collapse, the desperate gasping on the chamber floor. Jack wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. A bit sour, he said. Nothing happened. Oh trembling, and oh confusion, and oh weakness, and oh fall. The human stood exactly where he had been, breathing normally, steady eyes, steady hands, steady heartbeat. Unchanged, the silence became something else now, something close to fear, the full dose. Someone whispered. He drank all of it. That amount would kill a Drenith instantly. It would stop a Kethran heart. Sether Vone stared at him. For the first time in 3,000 years, the Poison Master looked uncertain. Jack handed the empty chalice back. Thanks for the drink. The chamber exploded into noise. Voices everywhere. Drenith cries. Theosai croaks. Kethran clicks firing across their hive link in sharp bursts of confusion. Delegates leaned over the tiers, shouting questions, accusations, disbelief. Sether Vone did not move. His scales had shifted to a pale, ugly shade that Veari never showed in public. Failure. That was what the color meant. Failure. The compound was pure, he hissed. Concentrated. There is no species resistant to it. Jack shrugged once. Guess there is now. The words were quiet, but everyone heard them. And worse, everyone understood them. Sether Vone's control, cracked. 3,000 years of ritual. 3,000 years of certainty. 3,000 years of watching others fall to his art. All broken by a human who should have been on the floor gasping for air. This is impossible, Sether Vone said, louder now. You should be convulsing. Your nervous system should be failing. Jack rolled one shoulder, should be doing a lot of things. That was the moment the room truly changed. Not when the human survived. Not when the poison failed. When Sether Vone lost control. Because if the Veari Poison Master could be wrong, then something deeper was wrong too. Something the Concordance did not want to face. That Sether Vone's hand moved to his belt. Slow. Hidden. Careful. He pulled out a second vial. This one was different. In oh shimmering color. In oh beauty. In oh ceremony. Just black liquid. Flat and dead. The room understood immediately. This was not tradition. This was execution. The ceremony must be completed properly, Sether Vone declared, trying to pull authority back into his voice. A second measure will confirm the validity of the welcome. No one stopped him, and no one objected. The human had no rights here. Observer only to no protections, that no formal standing, that if he died on the speaking floor, the Concordance could hide it inside formal language and call it a procedural failure. Sether Vone stepped closer, his fangs extended, long, thin, and shining with fresh poison. He was not offering a drink this time. He was going to put it straight into the bloodstream. No resistance. No chance. No surviving that. Jack watched him come. Still calm. Still. Quiet. Still not moving. Then Sether Vone struck. Fast enough that most of the chamber did not actually see the motion. 3,000 years of practice killing drove those poison fangs toward Jack's throat with perfect precision. Jack's hand came up. That was all. An dramatic shout. An big movement. His hand simply rose and caught Sether Vone's face, palm to skull, fingers locking around the back of the Veari head. The strike stopped dead. For a frozen moment, they stayed like that. The Poison Master, suspended in place, fangs hanging inches from Jack's wrist. Then Jack twisted. The sound was short, wet, final. Sether Vone's body dropped to the floor. The black vial shattered beside him. Poison hissed across the crystal, and the Veari Poison Master, 3,000 years old, feared across half the galaxy, lay still with his head turned the wrong way. The chamber went silent. Not one voice, not one click. Not one breath loud enough to matter. Jack looked down at the body, then up at the delegates staring. Back at him. He shouldn't have done that, he said. That broke the spell. Security alarms burst alive. Kethran enforcers tore away from the walls. Blades snapped out from their arms. Command signals flashed through the chamber. The grand chamber of the Galactic Concordance, built to display power, order, and control, became a kill box in a heartbeat, and at the center of it stood Jack Harlan, calm, unbothered, rolling one shoulder like a man about to start work. Right then, he said, "Who's next?" The Kethrin moved first. 20 enforcers broke from the walls at the same time, rushing the speaking floor in perfect formation. Their movements were so precise, it almost looked like one body split into many. Curved blades snapped from their forearms. Their armored legs struck the crystal floor in exact rhythm. Their hivelink fed each one the same picture, the same target, the same kill order. They had ended riots before they began. They had crushed rebellions. They had brought entire worlds to heel through discipline, fear, and total coordination. Now they were charging one man with a pry bar. Jack pulled the tool from his belt. The first enforcer reached him a fraction of a second ahead of the rest. Standard tactic. Test the target. Find the weakness. Then let the others close in and finish it. The blade flashed toward Jack's throat. Jack stepped forward instead of back. The strike cut empty air behind his head. The pry bar came up hard and fast and punched straight into the enforcer's compound eye. There was a wet cracking sound. The creature dropped instantly, and through the hive link, every Kethrin in that squad felt it. Not heard it, felt it, the pain, the terror. The sudden cut into nothing. It was like one mind had screamed inside 20 bodies. At once, 3 enforcers flinched. That tiny pause was enough. Jack ripped the pry bar free and swung low into the legs of the second attacker. The steel hit right where the armor plates joined. Not the strongest place. Not the safest. The place someone would only aim for if they were used to studying weak spots in hard things. The joint shattered. The enforcer folded. Before it could recover, Jack stamped down on its head and crushed it against the crystal floor. Another death. Another wave of pain burned through the hive link. Now the formation began to slip. The remaining enforcers spread wider, trying to adjust. Some circled left. Others moved right. A few held back, looking for an angle. Their perfect unity was already starting to break under the weight of shared fear. Jack did not wait to see what they chose. He charged, straight at the group, to his left, an careful defense, an retreat, an attempt to create distance. That he ran at them with the kind of violence that made old instincts wake up in every creature watching. The Kethrin were built for order, for ranks, for control, for enemies who panicked when outnumbered. Jack did none of those things. The pry bar cracked against black armor. The knife came out in his other hand. Plain, hard, practical, the kind of blade made for work more than display. He drove it between armor seams and into the softer flesh beneath. 1 enforcer slashed across Jack's ribs. The blade tore through his flight suit and opened a red line under it. He did not even look down. He smashed his elbow into the attacker's throat and felt something collapse. Blood sprayed across the crystal. His blood, their blood, did not matter. The hive link was becoming a nightmare now. Every death fed pain into every survivor. Every injury echoed through the whole group. Every moment of panic multiplied. What made the Kethrin deadly against armies now made them weak against one human who would not stop coming down. An enforcer froze in the middle of the strike, overwhelmed by the death flooding through the shared network. Jack opened its throat. Another turned and tried to fall back, instinct finally beating training. Jack caught it before it made 3 steps. A hard grab. A slam. A blade under the armor. Done. Above them, the delegates watched in stunned silence. The laughter was gone now. N01 made comment. N01 mocked the human smell, or the human sweat, or the simple tools at his belt. They watched him carve through the Concordance's security force with the same plain focus he had shown when walking off the shuttle. Not rage. Not madness. Work. That was somehow worse. In less than a minute, 14 Kethrin lay, dead on the speaking floor. The last 6 pulled back together. Their blades were still raised, but they were no longer attacking. Their eyes were wide. Their scent glands were flooding the air with distress signals. They were afraid. Jack stood in the middle of the bodies. His flight suit was torn open in several places. Blood ran down one arm from a cut he had not acknowledged. The pry bar dripped. The knife dripped. He was not breathing hard. That frightened the chamber more than the killing. Then the Theosi moved. Environmental protocols. One of their technicians cried from a control platform above. Activate them now. The air changed at once. Jack felt it before most species understood what was happening. The atmosphere in the Grand Chamber had always been perfectly controlled. Every pressure level, every gas mixture, every degree of temperature was managed, so the Concordance's member species could sit in comfort while they judged the rest of the galaxy. Now those same systems became weapons. The oxygen dropped first, subtle at first, then hard, then brutal at 21%, became 15, then 12, then at the same time. The heat vanished from the room. Cold rolled through the chamber in a wave so sharp it felt like a blade. Not normal cold, not the slow chill of evening air. This was mechanical cold, sudden, deep, violent, the kind designed to shut a body down fast. Then came the pressure. Heavy air pushed against skulls, ears, lungs. It thickened, compressed, turned each breath into work. The upper tiers reacted immediately. Drenith delegates fluffed their feathers in panic, trying to protect their fragile hollow bones from the freezing drop. Vayari coiled tighter on their heated platforms, their scales dimming as their body heat fell. Even the surviving Kethrin clicked in discomfort, their breathing systems not built for so little oxygen that on the speaking floor, Jack stopped moving. His breath turned white in the air. The blood on his arm darkened and thickened in the cold. He could feel pressure building behind his eyes, in his chest, in the deep spaces of his skull. Every breath came heavier than the last. The Theosi watched their displays with rising hope. Core temperature is dropping. Respiration is slowing. Blood oxygen is still higher than expected. Lower the oxygen further. Do it. Jack's knee touched the floor point, one hand pressed flat against the crystal to steady himself. The chamber watched. Now, they thought. Now the human breaks. The air was so thin it felt like trying to breathe mud. The cold had reached muscle and bone. His lungs burned. His vision tightened. Each inhale was smaller than the one before it. But Jack forced himself to control it. Slow in, slow out. Waste less, fight less. Use less. That IT was not some grand heroic trick. That IT was the kind of breathing discipline learned by creatures that came from a world where bad conditions could kill you if you lost your head. Up in the control station, the Theosi pushed harder. Take it below 8%. That level will affect the lower tiers. Do it anyway. Jack's second knee hit the floor. Both hands were down now. His head lowered. The chamber. It looked like collapse. The Theosi. It looked like victory. The remaining Kethrin. It looked like rescue. And then the systems began killing the wrong targets. The last 6 Kethrin enforcers dropped first. Their bodies could not handle the oxygen loss. Their breathing failed. They twitched on the floor, clicking weakly, then went still. That a Drenith in the lower tiers lost balance and fell from its perch. Its wings were too cold to catch air. It struck the floor below with a brittle snapping sound. Two Vayari slumped against one another on a platform, their scales going gray. A Theosi technician had to be caught by another before collapsing over the console. The human, someone shouted in panic. Focus on the human. Jack raised his head. Frost clung to his eyebrows. His eyes were bloodshot. His face had gone pale. Every breath looked painful, but his gaze was clear, and it was fixed not on the floor, not on the bodies around him, but on the environmental control station 3 tiers above. Then, slowly, he put one foot under himself. That a Theosi stared at the readouts and whispered, "That is impossible. 7% oxygen. No carbon-based life form in the Concordance database should have been standing." Jack stood anyway. Not in some dramatic leap. Slowly, grindingly, like a machine forcing itself upright through damage. His muscles trembled. His joints creaked. His heart pounded so hard it looked like it might break his ribs, but he got to his feet. And then he started walking. The chamber went quiet again. He was still moving. Still coming. The Theosi panicked. "Gravity field," the lead technician shouted. "Now!" The floor beneath Jack changed in an instant. 3 times standard gravity slammed down on him. His weight tripled. He hit the crystal hard. Both knees cracked into the floor. His palms slapped down. The pry bar fell from his hand, suddenly too heavy to hold. Up above, the Theosi pushed the controls harder. 3.5. 4.5. Jack's spine bent under the force. His arms shook. The pressure was everywhere, not just on his body, but inside it. Organs dragging downward. Blood straining under the load. Lungs fighting against weight. Bones taking more force than they were ever meant to hold. The analysts had once called human bone density inefficient evolutionary overbuild. Now that same inefficiency kept him from snapping in half. Maximum output, the lead technician said. Everything the field can hold. The localized gravity climbed again. Jack flattened further against the floor. Blood vessels burst in his eyes. Red lines spread across the whites. His breath came in ugly, crushed sounds. And then, impossibly, he started moving point one hand, then the other, fingers digging into crystal, dragging himself forward centimeter by centimeter under a force that should have crushed him into stillness. The technician stared. The skeleton should have failed. The cardiovascular load is beyond survivable. This is not possible. The generator began to scream. A sharp mechanical shriek cut through the chamber. The field had been designed for control, not for desperation. The systems were being pushed past their safe limits. The gravity, while centered on Jack, flickered once, then spread. What had been focused on one man leaked into the chamber. Then the entire room started to come apart. The Drenith were hit first. Their hollow bones, perfect for lightness and flight, shattered under sudden pressure spikes. Bodies dropped from their perches screaming. Their elegant voices twisted into awful sounds no one in the chamber had ever heard from them before. Ve'ari platforms lurched sideways as gravity shifted direction. Long bodies slid, slammed into railings, crashed into lower tiers. The Kethrin along the walls went down in waves. Their hive link filled with confusion as hundreds of them felt different pulls in different directions at once. Some were crushed, some were thrown. All coordination vanished. Even the Auric moved. They had stood motionless for centuries at the highest tier, silent stone giants with molten eyes, watching every meeting without speaking. Now they adjusted their stance. That alone was enough to make several old delegates go cold with fear on the speaking floor. The weight on Jack suddenly lifted. He stayed on his hands and knees for a second, breathing hard now at last. Blood running from his nose, his ears, the corners of his eyes. Then he rose, slowly, painfully. Every movement showed the cost. His body had taken damage now. Real damage. Muscles torn, joints strained, maybe worse. But he stood again. Around him, the Grand Chamber was collapsing into panic. "Restore order!" someone screamed from an upper tier. And no one could. The Concordance had spent 10,000 years building itself on rank, ritual, and control. Every species knew where it stood. Every system had a purpose. Every insult had a proper form. Every punishment had a measured response. Now all of that was breaking at once. The Ve'ari shouted at the Theosi for destabilizing the chamber. The Theosi shouted back that the Ve'ari had started this with a poison ritual. Kethrin enforcers received conflicting command signals from too many authorities and froze where they stood, unable to decide which order mattered most. And in the middle of all of it stood the human they had invited to be humiliated, bleeding, bruised, half frozen, pressed by poison, cold, pressure, and crushing gravity, still standing, still watching, still not done. Then the second wave came. 40 fresh Kethrin enforcers poured in from the chamber's upper security alcoves. These were not tied into the broken hive link that had carried the pain of the first squad. Their eyes were clear. Their blades were ready. Their formation was tight. The delegates watching from the wrecked tiers. This looked like the moment control would return. 40 disciplined enforcers against one injured human. This had to be enough. Jack bent and picked up his knife. The first of the new enforcers died before it understood the fight had already started. Jack moved straight into them. Not with parade ground precision. Not with the polished motions of a trained officer. What came out of him was older than that, rougher, that harder it was. The kind of violence that belonged to creatures raised by danger instead of comfort. The kind learned not in schools or barracks, but in the long habit of surviving things that wanted to kill you. He broke their formation before it could settle around him. When two enforcers attacked together, Jack stepped aside and forced a third into their path. Their own blades found the wrong body. One of them realized the mistake too late. Jack was already there, knife driving into the gap under its jaw. The Theosi tried to help from above. Damaged gravity systems flared again, targeting the human's position. But the chamber controls were failing now. Point one pulse missed Jack entirely and crushed two enforcers flat against the floor. Another hit too wide and hurled three more into a crystal wall hard enough to crack their armor. The atmosphere still had not fully stabilized either. Cold zones mixed with sudden pockets of burning heat. Oxygen levels climbed and crashed without warning. Delegates in the lower tiers choked, fainted, or died from the same systems meant to kill a single human. Jack kept moving through it all. Point one enforcer after another went down. His flight suit was almost gone now, hanging in strips from his body. Cuts crossed his chest and arms. One eye was swelling shut. His left leg had started to drag slightly, something wrong in the knee. Blood covered him so completely it was hard to tell which wounds were new and which had never stopped bleeding. Still, he did not slow. Point 40 became 30. Point 30 became 20, then 10, then 5. The last survivors broke. They turned and ran. Jack did not chase them. Not because he could not, because he had chosen a new target. Point 3 tiers above the speaking floor sat the environmental control station, a raised platform of crystal displays, haptic panels, and system cores that managed air, pressure, temperature, and local gravity across the entire chamber. Point 6 Theosi technicians were still there. They had watched the killing from behind their consoles, believing distance and systems would protect them. Now Jack looked up at them and started climbing. The grand chamber had not been built for assault. The seating tiers were made for ceremony, not battle. Delegates scrambled away from him as he came up through the broken ranks. Some still had enough pride or panic to try and stop him, but Veari lashed out with ceremonial blades. Jack caught the arm and snapped it at the joint without even breaking stride at a Drenith dove at his face with talons spread wide. Jack hit it out of the air, so hard it spun across 2 rows of seating and did not get back up. He kept climbing. The Theosi watched him come, and real fear finally set in. They had no weapons. They had never needed weapons. Their systems were their weapons. Their machines, their safety protocols, their controlled environments, their clever answers. Now, a bleeding human was climbing straight through all of that. When Jack reached the platform, the lead technician croaked, "Please, we were following procedure." Jack grabbed him by the throat and slammed him down into the main console. Crystal screens shattered. Light burst from broken circuits. The Theosi's body punched through part of the display surface and dropped halfway into the machinery beneath. Sparks sprayed out. System alarms screamed. The others tried to run. Jack caught them one by one, but he did not kill all of them. Some he just broke. An arm twisted backward until the bone came out, a leg crushed under a boot, a spine bent over the edge of a console, with a sound that made even nearby delegates look away. Enough to stop them. Enough to leave survivors who would remember every second. The last technician he held face first over the cracked controls that still governed the chamber's atmosphere. "Turn it off," Jack said. The Theosi shook so hard its hands slipped across the panel. "I can't. The system is damaged." "I don't." Jack pushed its face closer to the sparking console. "Turn it off." Trembling fingers found working commands. Emergency shutdown routines began to roll through the system. Air pressure started to steady. Temperature swings slowed. Gravity distortions weakened. Jack let the technician drop. That IT collapsed to the floor in a shaking heap, leaking stress fluids, too terrified to move. Jack turned and looked out across the grand chamber. The place was ruined. Bodies were everywhere, on the speaking floor, on the broken tiers, against walls, across platforms. Kethrin, Drenith, Veari, Theosi, some dead, some dying, some alive, but broken in ways that would never fully heal. Blood and stranger fluids stained the crystal. The perfect order of the chamber was gone. The neat tiers of power meant nothing now. The room looked less like the center of galactic civilization and more like the inside of Slaughterhouse. Red emergency lights washed everything in a dull, pulsing glow. Jack found a master power junction at the station. He could have shut it down cleanly. He didn't. He smashed it, a hard, brutal strike that broke the housing and destabilized the system core. The red lights flickered once, twice. Then the whole grand chamber went dark. Not dim, not shadowed. Dark, complete blackness swallowed the room, and in that darkness, the survivors heard the truth of what remained. The clicking distress calls of wounded Catherine, the wet sobbing of Theosai, the broken, musical cries of injured Drenith, the hissed prayers of Ari who had never needed to pray before. And somewhere in all that black, moving without any warning sound at all, was the human. N01 spoke at first. N01 wanted to, that a voice in the darkness finally whispered, "What have we done?" No one answered, because everyone knew. The darkness did not bring silence, that it brought fear. Species that had spent their entire lives in climate-controlled comfort now pressed together like prey animals in a cave. The old rules died quickly when sight disappeared. Hierarchy vanished with the lights, that a Theosai crouched beside Avari, that a Drenith hid behind the body of a dead Kethvorin, and no one cared who ranked above whom anymore. Only who might still be alive when the lights returned. "Where is he?" someone whispered. And no answer. And no one knew. The chamber was vast. 300 meters of height. Tiered seating everywhere. Broken platforms. Dead bodies. Fallen panas. Cracked railings. 1,000 hiding places. And the human knew how to move through wreckage. Then a scream ripped through the dark, short, wet, cut off in the middle. It came from the western side. Several delegates turned toward it, even though they could not see a thing. "He's there," one voice hissed. A second scream came from the eastern side. Closer, panic spread instantly. "That's impossible. He cannot move that fast." A body fell from somewhere high above and hit the speaking floor with a sick, heavy sound. The chamber went quiet again. Every surviving delegate understood the same thing at once. Noise gave away location. Location meant death. They waited. Time became strange in the dark. Maybe minutes passed. Maybe more. The only measure left was the next scream, and the next. Each one from a different direction. Each one proving the same point. The human was still hunting. A surviving Catherine tried to restore order. It gathered 6 wounded enforcers and forced them into a defensive circle beneath one of the lower tiers. Blades extended, eyes searching uselessly through the black. The hive link was damaged, but some of them still clung to training. Jack came at them from below. He had crawled under the seating through maintenance gaps and structural supports, moving beneath the very floor they stood on. He came up through broken crystal and hit them before the first warning click could spread. Point 2 died immediately. The others turned and struck blindly at the dart. Point 1 blade hit another enforcer. Point 1 found only air. Point 1 found Jack for half a second before the knife went into the attacker's throat. It was over in moments. The remaining Catherine across the chamber felt those deaths through the fragments of their failing link. That was enough. The last of them stopped trying to fight. They curled into defensive positions and waited. In another part of the chamber, a Drenith aristocrat started laughing. "Hi. Broken. Beautiful in the wrong way." The sound echoed across the darkness until another Drenith hit him in the head hard enough to silence him forever, and no one objected. The dark had stripped away manners along with status. The highest tier, the Auric finally moved. They had not spoken in 600 years. They had stood in silence through generations of debates, wars, classifications, sanctions, and ceremonies. Stone giants with bodies like weathered mountains, they were older than most histories in the chamber. When the first Auric shifted its weight, the sound rolled through the dark like distant thunder. Hope flared among the survivors. The Auric were ancient, powerful. If anyone could end this, it was them. The giants began to descend. Each step shook the damaged structure. Their molten eyes swept the chamber, taking in the blood, the wreckage, the bodies, the failures of every proud species that had believed itself master of the galaxy. They reached the sealed main doors. Security protocols had locked them during the chaos. The doors were massive, reinforced alloy built to contain any threat until command systems could regain control. The lead Auric placed one giant hand on the metal, then pushed. The alloy screamed. The whole doorway bent outward. Metal tore from its housing. Cold corridor light spilled into the chamber in a thin, blinding line. The survivors stared. The Auric had not come down to fight the human. They had come to leave that a Theosai, shaking and half-blind with fear, stumbled toward them. "You must help us," it cried. "The creature is killing everyone. Your strength could..." The lead Auric turned its head. When it spoke, the voice was like continents grinding together, deep enough to vibrate in bone. "You invited the consequence." The chamber froze. "You mocked it when it arrived." The Theosai trembled harder. "You attacked it when it did not die." The Auric looked across the chamber one last time, at the blood and ruin and survivors huddled in the dark. "Now you learn what the quarantine was protecting." The Theosai stared up, confused even through terror. The Auric turned back toward the corridor. Not the galaxy from the Deathworld. It stepped through the ruined doorway. The Deathworld from the galaxy's arrogance. Then it left. The others followed, point one by one. Silent again. They did not look back. The survivors watched the giants go and felt something colder than fear settle into them. The Auric had judged the situation in a single glance and decided the humans were not the danger that needed stopping, and O1 rushed for the door after them, and O1 wanted to be the first shape moving in the light, because somewhere behind them, still inside the chamber, still in the dark, was Jack Harland, and nobody wanted him to. Notice them next. The Veari were not done. 17 of them still lived. Not warriors in the usual sense. Not soldiers built for open battle. But they were Veari, masters of poison, chemistry, slow death, and perfect dosage. For thousands of years, they had controlled fear with glass vials and measure drops. They had ended enemies without noise, without blood, without ever needing to touch them. Now, in the ruined dark of the Grand Chamber, they abandoned restraint. They took over part of the Eastern Tier and started breaking open everything they had brought to the summit: ceremonial toxins, contact agents, airborne compounds, liquids that stopped hearts in seconds, mist that shut down breathing, poisons meant for pain, poisons meant for paralysis, poisons meant to kill so slowly that the victim had time to understand what was happening. The Veari spread them across rails, steps, broken seating, and the floor around them until their section of the chamber became a chemical grave. In a fully working chamber, the containment systems might have held it, but the systems were damaged now. Airflow was unstable. Pressure shifts came in sudden waves. Containment fields flickered. Instead of forming one clean kill zone, the toxins broke apart into drifting pockets of death. Some areas became so thick the air itself looked wrong. Other places held thin, invisible sheets that would kill with one breath or one touch. "This will work," said the second eldest Veari, though even he did not sound certain anymore. His scales had turned a pale gray, a fear color no Veari would ever choose to show in public. "No creature can survive this." Sethervone said the same thing. Another hissed. "That was one dose," the second eldest snapped. "This is everything." A third Veari looked nervously at the broken systems around them. "The chamber controls are unstable. The spread is uneven. The area is saturated," the second eldest said. "If the human comes through, it dies." So they coiled together in the middle of their own poisoned fortress. 17 survivors, close enough to feel less alone, close enough to believe they still had control over something. Then, from somewhere in the darkness beyond the Eastern Tier, footsteps began to sound, slow, steady, coming closer. Every Veari froze. The second eldest raised his head higher. He knows. He can smell it. The footsteps reached the edge of the poison zone, stopped. For one hopeful second, the Veari thought the trap had worked before it even began. Then the footsteps started again. Jack walked into it. The smell hit him at once. Bitter, sharp, chemical, thick enough to taste. His eyes watered on instinct. The air itself felt wrong. Heavy. Dangerous. The floor ahead gleamed where spilled compounds had spread across crystal and broken metal. He kept moving. Not blindly. Not carelessly. He watched the ground as he walked. Broken vials everywhere. Different casings, different mixtures, some empty, some not. The Veari would never stand inside a zone like this without protection. That meant antidotes, Jack saw one unbroken vial near the edge of step, grabbed it, and drove it into his thigh through torn fabric. He had no idea what it countered. Did not mattered. He just needed time. The contact poisons hit first. Chemicals soaked through his damaged boots, through the ripped remains of his flight suit, into open cuts, into burns, into skin already torn raw. Blisters rose across his legs. Flesh split. Blood mixed with poison and ran down his body. He kept moving. Then the airborne compounds reached deeper. His lungs burned. His chest tightened. His hands began to tremble. His vision blurred at the edges. Point one toxin tried to shut down his nerves. Another attacked breathing. Another started breaking cells down from the inside. Blood ran from his nose, then from one ear, then from his mouth. He coughed wetly and still did not stop. The Vaari watched in silence. This time the poison was working. They could see it. His body was failing. His breathing had changed. His balance was wrong. His skin was breaking down. But the part that mattered most was still wrong. He was still coming. More, the second eldest screamed. Use all of it. Panic broke whatever control they had left. They started throwing vials. Crystal shattered against Jack's chest, arms, shoulders, face. Liquid splashed into wounds. Gas rose around him in new waves. One vial burst against his neck, another against his ribs. A third broke under his boot and sprayed his exposed ankle. Jack caught one before it shattered. At a different one he ripped from a Vaari's hand as it tried to inject itself with a reserve antidote. He bit the seal off the first and swallowed what he could. The second he jammed into his leg. Still no idea what either did. Still no time to care. Then he reached them. The second eldest struck first, not with a blade, with fangs. Long ceremonial fangs drove deep into Jack's shoulder, injecting the deadliest. Compound Invari biochemistry straight into his blood at this range. Against most species, that was the end. Jack grabbed the Vaari's head with both hands. The sound that followed was familiar now. Short, wet, final, the body dropped. The rest broke. Some lunged in panic. Some tried to flee. Some curled back over each other, trying to escape through the same poison space they had built to trap him. But their own kill zone turned against them now. Their antidotes protected them from their own compounds. In careful doses. Not from chaos. Not from spilled mixtures. Not from shattered combinations. Not from the flailing bodies of dying kin knocking them into fresh poison. Jack moved through them like a machine that no longer cared how damaged it was. Point one down. Then another. Then another that a Vaari struck at his throat and lost an arm for a point one, tried to slither past him and left a bloody trail before collapsing. Another tried to inject him from behind. Jack caught the wrist, crushed it, and drove the broken vial back into its owner. By the time it ended, the eastern tier was silent. Point 17 Vaari lay still in the middle of their own chemical wall. Jack stood among them, barely recognizable as human now. His body was a wreck, skin blistered and peeling, blood running from too many places to count. Burns, cuts, punctures, toxin damage. His shoulder was swollen around the fong wounds. His breath rattled. His hands shook when he lowered them. He coughed, and blood sprayed across the nearest corpse. But he was standing, and the Vaari were not. He turned away from the bodies and walked back toward the center of the chamber, toward the speaking floor, toward the place where this had all started. Then the lights came back. Not all at once. First a weak flicker, then another. Then dim emergency lights slowly spread across the grand chamber as damaged systems finally forced themselves through a partial reboot, and the survivors saw everything. All at once, bodies. Across every tier. Kethran enforcers scattered like broken machines. Drenith nobles crumpled beneath shattered perches. Theosai slumped over ruined control stations. Vaari dead inside their own poison field. The crystal floor of the speaking ground was no longer crystal. It was red and black and stained with fluids from a dozen species. Cracks spread through it where gravity surges had stressed the old structure beyond design. Burn marks scarred the walls. Railings hung bent and broken. And at the center of all of it stood Jack Harland. He looked less like a man now and more like something that had refused to die out of pure stubbornness. His flight suit had become rags. Cuts covered every part of him. Chemical burns crawled across his skin. Blood seeped from his eyes, nose, ears, and mouth. One shoulder hung too low, maybe partly out of place. His breathing sounded wet and wrong. Yet somehow, impossibly, he was still standing. The survivors stared out. 43 delegates remained from the original 1,200, just 43. They were scattered across the chamber, pressed behind debris, against walls, between broken seats, too afraid to move even with the lights back. Jack looked at them. For one long moment, nobody breathed. Then he bent, picked up his pry bar from the floor, wiped it once on what remained of his suit, and slid it back into his belt. A few steps later, he found the knife, did the same, and kept walking. Speech. Rage. Ceremony. Just a man collecting his tools after work. The delegates flinched as he passed. The Theosai threw itself backward so hard it fell from a damaged platform. Drineth covered its eyes with trembling wings. The surviving Kethrin pressed flat against a wall and did not even try to lift its blade. Jack did not look at them. His attention stayed on the broken doorway at the far end of the chamber, the one the Auric had torn open when they left. He passed Sethervone's body without slowing. Poison Master still lay where his neck had been broken. Beside him rested the empty chalice of welcome, the ancient cup that should have marked humanity's humiliation and instead had become the moment the Concordance destroyed itself. Jack reached the doorway and stopped. For a second, he stood there against the corridor light, one hand resting on twisted metal. Behind him, the survivors waited, terrified that he might turn back, that he might decide 43 was still too many, that this was not the end. Then Jack looked over his shoulder. His eyes were red. His face was streaked with blood and poisoned. He swept one last glance across the ruined grand chamber. The broken tiers, the bodies, the survivors, the shattered remains of 10,000 years of order. Next time, he said, send a better invitation. Then he walked out, and one moved. Not for a long time. The survivors stayed exactly where they were, waiting for him to return, waiting for another wave of killing, waiting for proof that the nightmare was still happening. Nothing came. Eventually, one surviving Theosai found a console that still half-worked. Communications were down. The chamber was locked in emergency isolation. The planetary defense grid had gone offline during the system cascade. Rescue teams were trying to break into the facility from outside, but the damage was too severe. It would take hours to reach them. Hours alone in that chamber. Hours surrounded by the dead. Hours to think about what had happened to a young Drineth, barely past fledgling age, slowly stepped toward the speaking floor. It looked at the blood on the crystal, at the bodies of species once feared across the galaxy, at the broken center of a power that had seemed eternal. Then it asked the question no one wanted to answer. What do we do now? No one replied. Because they were all thinking the same thing. For 10,000 years, the Galactic Concordance had ruled through certainty. They had classified worlds, ranked species, measured danger, controlled every threat with ritual, technology, and arrogance so old it had hardened into law. They had looked at a human from a death world and seen a joke. They had sent an invitation as an insult. They had offered poison as a welcome. And now they sat in the ruins of their own chamber, surrounded by their dead, staring at the doorway where the human had disappeared. The galaxy had changed, and they were the ones who would have to explain how. And just like that, the story was over. Not with a speech, not with peace, not with answers, just with silence, blood, and a doorway left open behind the one man the galaxy had laughed at only a short time before. If this story pulled you in, let me know in the comments. Even a simple hi helps more than you think, and I always like seeing who's here watching with me. And before you go, check the pinned comment if there's something there worth your time. Also, I picked another video for you to watch next. Just click the card on the screen, or jump into the full playlist if you want more stories like this one. See you in the next one.